The Crimson Dawn was supposed to be impossible to destroy. Built from the strongest metal in the galaxy, powered by 3 fusion cores, and armed with enough weapons to level a small moon, it was the pride of the Zeltarian Empire. For 300 years, it had never lost a battle. Not once. Until today. Captain Zek 4 stood on the bridge, his 4 arms working frantically across the control panels. Warning lights flashed red everywhere, and the ship's computer kept repeating the same terrible message: critical systems failing. Hull breach detected. Evacuation recommended. How is this possible? Zek 4 hissed through his breathing slits. His blue-scaled skin had turned pale with fear. We're fighting humans. They barely have space travel. The enemy ship on the main screen didn't look like much. The human vessel was maybe a tenth the size of the Crimson Dawn, with rusty patches on its hull and smoke coming from one of its engines. It looked like it should have fallen apart years ago. But somehow, this tiny ship had already destroyed 2 of their escort vessels and damaged the Crimson Dawn's main cannon. The impossible was happening right before their eyes. "Sir," called out Navigator Vel 2 from her station. "The human ship is moving again. It's heading straight for us." On the screen, the small human vessel accelerated toward them. It should have been suicide. The Crimson Dawn was 50 times bigger and had shields that could stop nuclear weapons. But Zek 4 felt his stomach twist with worry. "Fire everything," he ordered. "Full power to all weapons." Bright blue energy beams shot out from the Crimson Dawn, lighting up space like deadly fireworks. The human ship twisted and spun through the attack, dodging with impossible grace. A few shots hit, but the little vessel kept coming. "Direct hit," shouted Weapons Officer Drix 7. Their shields should be down, but the human ship didn't slow down. If anything, it moved faster. "That's impossible," Zek 4 muttered. "Run a scan." How are they still flying? The results made no sense. According to their computers, the human ship should have been destroyed 3 times over. Its hull was cracked, its engines were failing, and its weapons were barely working. Yet it kept moving like nothing was wrong. "Sir," Vel 2 said quietly, "I'm reading something strange about their pilot." "What do you mean?" "The life signs are unusual. It's definitely human, but there's something else. Something I've never seen before." Inside the human ship, Marcus Chen gripped the controls with his one good hand. His right arm had been lost in a mining accident 5 years ago, replaced with a mechanical prosthetic that the other pilots called the Hand of Fate. They said it because Marcus had an impossible talent for being in the right place at the right time, for making shots that should have missed, for surviving fights that should have killed him. Marcus didn't believe in fate or luck. He believed in getting the job done. "Come on, old girl," he whispered to his ship, the Lucky Strike. "One more run." The Lucky Strike was 40 years old and held together with spare parts and stubbornness. Marcus had bought it cheap from a scrapyard and fixed it up himself. It wasn't pretty, but it was his, and they understood each other. The massive alien warship filled his front window now. He could see the weapon ports tracking him, trying to get a lock. But Marcus had learned something about these Zeltarian ships during the fight. They were powerful, but they were also predictable. They relied too much on their computers and not enough on instinct. Humans were different. Humans could improvise. Marcus dove under the Crimson Dawn's main hull, using the ship's own bulk to shield him from most of its weapons. His metal hand moved across the controls without conscious thought, making tiny adjustments that kept him alive as energy beams flashed past. "Target acquired," he said into his radio. "This is Lucky Strike to Earth Defense. I'm going for their reactor core." "Negative, Lucky Strike," came the reply from Admiral Hayes. "That ship is too heavily armored. Pull back and wait for reinforcement." Marcus smiled grimly. "With respect, Admiral, reinforcements aren't going to get here in time. These aliens have already destroyed half our fleet. If we don't stop them here, they'll reach Earth." He didn't wait for a reply. Marcus had seen what the Zeltarians did to planets that resisted them. He'd been on Kepler 7 when they glassed the entire surface from orbit. 3 billion people turned to ash in an hour. That wasn't going to happen to Earth. Not while he could still fight. The Lucky Strike shuddered as it took more hits. Warning alarms screamed in the cockpit, and smoke started pouring from the engine compartment. Marcus could taste blood in his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue. Just a little further, he told his ship. On the Crimson Dawn's bridge, panic was setting in. He's inside our defensive perimeter, Drix 7 reported. I can't get a clear shot without hitting our own hull. Where is he going? Zek 4 demanded. Vel 2 checked her screens. Based on his trajectory, he's heading for the main reactor. The captain's eyes went wide. That's impossible. The reactor is protected by 3 meters of battle armor. A ship that size couldn't even scratch it. Sir, Drix 7 said quietly, what if he's not planning to shoot it? The terrible truth hit them all at the same time. The human wasn't trying to destroy the reactor with weapons. He was going to ram it. Full reverse. Zek 4 ordered. Get us away from him. But the Crimson Dawn was too big to turn quickly. The massive warship began to lumber backward, but the nimble human fighter was already through their defenses. Marcus could see the reactor housing now, a massive cylinder in the center of the alien ship. His scanners showed the weak spot, a maintenance hatch that wasn't quite as heavily armored as the rest. It was a tiny target, maybe 3 meters wide. At this speed, he'd have maybe a tenth of a second to line up the shot. His metal hand moved without hesitation. The Lucky Strike slammed into the maintenance hatch at full speed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the reactor housing cracked, and brilliant white light began pouring out. Marcus had just enough time to think about Earth, about the blue skies and green fields he was fighting to protect, before the explosion consumed everything. On the bridge of the Crimson Dawn, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. But the damage was done. The main reactor was offline, and without it, their weapons, shields, and engines were all failing. Damage report. Zek 4 shouted. Main reactor destroyed, Drix 7 reported, his voice hollow. Backup power at 30% and falling. Weapons offline. Shields down. We're dead in space. Through the main window, they could see the approaching lights of human reinforcements. Admiral Hayes had brought everything Earth had left, a dozen ships that were smaller and weaker than the Crimson Dawn, but now it didn't matter. The great warship was helpless. How? Zek 4 whispered. How did one human do this? Vel 2 was studying her scanner readings from the moment of impact. Sir, I think I understand. The human pilot, his cybernetic arm was interfaced directly with his ship's computers. He wasn't just flying it. He was part of it. The precision required for that attack, no organic being could have managed it. So the Hand of Fate wasn't just a nickname, Drix 7 said quietly. What do you mean? The metal hand. It really was their Hand of Fate. 3 hours later, Admiral Hayes stood in the docking bay of his flagship, watching as Zeltarian prisoners were led away. The mighty Crimson Dawn was now a prize of war, its crew defeated and its weapons silent. Any word on Marcus? Hayes asked his aide. Lieutenant Rodriguez shook her head. No survivors from the Lucky Strike, sir. The explosion vaporized everything within 100 meters. Hayes nodded sadly. He'd known Marcus for 10 years, ever since the young pilot had enlisted after losing his arm. Marcus had never been the best pilot in the fleet, but he'd been the most determined. When other pilots gave up, Marcus found a way. What's our status on the rest of the Zeltarian fleet? Hayes asked. In full retreat, sir. Word of what happened here has spread through their ranks. They're calling it impossible, a human defeating their strongest ship with an inferior vessel. Hayes looked out at the stars. Maybe it was impossible. But Marcus never let that stop him before. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Lucky Strike spread across human space. The pilot who had given his life to save Earth became a legend. But the Zeltarians told a different version of the story. In their version, it wasn't technology or luck that had defeated their greatest warship. It was something uniquely human, the willingness to sacrifice everything for others, the refusal to accept defeat, and the strange alchemy that happened when human determination met the right tool at the right moment. They called it the Hand of Fate, and they learned to fear it. Captain Zek 4, now a prisoner on Earth, spent his days trying to understand what had happened. His engineers had examined the wreckage of the Lucky Strike, studying every piece they could find. The ship had been inferior in every measurable way: weaker hull, slower engines, fewer weapons. How did he know exactly where to hit us? Zek 4 asked his human interrogator. Dr. Sarah Kim looked up from her notes. Marcus was a mining engineer before he became a pilot. He understood structural weak points better than most military officers. Plus, he'd been studying your ships for months, looking for vulnerabilities. But the precision required, the timing, the cybernetic interface helped, Dr. Kim admitted. But mostly, it was practice. Marcus spent every free hour in the simulator, running attack scenarios against Zeltarian ships. He'd tried that exact maneuver 1,000 times in virtual reality. Zek 4 shook his head. Your species is insane. No Zeltarian would fly a suicide mission like that. Maybe that's why you lost, Dr. Kim said quietly. The conversation stuck with Zek 4. Over the following months, as he learned more about human culture, he began to understand. Humans didn't just fight for territory or resources. They fought for ideas, for people they'd never met, for future generations who hadn't even been born yet. The hand of fate wasn't Marcus's cybernetic arm. It was the human spirit itself, unpredictable, stubborn, and capable of achieving the impossible when everything was on the line. 6 months after the battle, a small ceremony was held in Earth orbit. A monument was placed at the exact spot where the Lucky Strike had made its final run. The inscription was simple. Marcus Chen. Pilot. Hero. He proved that the impossible is just another word for difficult. Admiral Hayes spoke at the ceremony, his words broadcast across human space. Marcus didn't have the best ship or the most advanced weapons. But he had something our enemies couldn't understand: the absolute refusal to let evil win. That's the real hand of fate. It's in all of us. As the monument drifted in space, reflecting the light of distant stars, it served as a reminder. The Zeltarians had brought their strongest ship, their most advanced technology, their centuries of military experience. But they hadn't counted on facing a human who simply would not quit. The war continued for 3 more years, but the tide had turned. Every time Zeltarian forces seemed overwhelming, human pilots would remember the Lucky Strike. They'd remember that impossible didn't mean hopeless, and that sometimes, all you needed was the right person in the right place with the determination to see it through. The hand of fate had many forms: cybernetic arms, creative tactics, last-minute inspiration, and pure stubborn courage. But it always came down to the same thing: humans refusing to accept defeat when something important was at stake. And in the end, that was enough to save not just Earth, but all the worlds that came after. The Crimson Dawn still exists, now serving as a museum ship in Earth orbit. Visitors can walk through its corridors and see the exact spot where Marcus Chen changed the course of history. The tour guides always end with the same words. The strongest ship in the galaxy was defeated by an old fighter held together with spare parts and stubbornness. But it wasn't the ship that won the battle. It was the man inside it, and the metal hand that became the hand of fate. Children who visit often ask if the story is really true. The guides always smile and tell them to look at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Lucky Strike's monument still drifts in space, proof that one person with enough determination can change everything. After all, the hand of fate isn't about having the best equipment or the most power. It's about being in the right place at the right time with the courage to act. And sometimes, that's all you need to save the world. 5 years after the Battle of Kepler Station, Captain Lisa Rodriguez walked through the halls of the Earth Defense Academy. She paused in front of a display case containing a burned piece of metal, all that remained of Marcus Chen's cybernetic arm. "Tell me about the hand of fate," said the young cadet beside her. Lisa smiled. She'd been Marcus's wingman during the war, one of the few pilots who'd flown alongside him and lived to tell about it. "The hand of fate wasn't really about the metal arm," she said. "It was about what Marcus taught us, that being human means never giving up, even when the odds are impossible." The cadet, barely 18 and eager to prove himself, frowned. "But surely technology matters. Our new ships are 10 times more advanced than the Lucky Strike." "They are," Lisa agreed. "And that's good. But technology is just a tool. What matters is the person using it. She gestured to the metal fragment. Marcus could have had the most advanced ship in the fleet, and he still would have found a way to do the impossible. Because that's what humans do. They walked on, passing portraits of war heroes and displays of captured alien weapons. But the cadet's attention kept drifting back to that simple piece of burned metal. "Captain," he said finally, "do you think we'll face something like the Zeltarians again?" Lisa stopped walking. Through the Academy's great windows, she could see the construction yards where humanity's newest starships were being built. Bigger, faster, more powerful than anything Marcus had ever dreamed of flying. "Probably," she said honestly. "The galaxy is a big place, and not everyone out there wishes us well. But when that day comes, remember this, it won't be our ships that save us. It'll be our people. People willing to make the hard choices, to sacrifice for others, to find a way when there doesn't seem to be one." She placed her hand on the young cadet's shoulder. "The hand of fate lives in all of us. Marcus just showed us how to use it." As they continued their tour, neither of them noticed the small group of alien visitors observing from across the hall. They were Zeltarians, former enemies now turned reluctant allies, here to study human military doctrine. "I still don't understand it," one of them muttered in their clicking language. "How can such an inferior species consistently defeat superior technology?" Their leader, a scarred veteran who'd fought at Kepler Station, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "They call it the hand of fate," he said. "But I think it's something simpler and more terrifying than that." "What do you mean?" "They refuse to lose. Even when losing is the logical outcome, they find a way to win. It's not technology or tactics. It's stubbornness." The younger Zeltarian scoffed. "Stubbornness is not a military strategy." "No," the veteran agreed. "But it's something else. It's hope. And hope, my friend, is the most dangerous weapon in the universe." Meanwhile, in a small workshop on Mars, an old man named Sam Chen, Marcus's father, put the finishing touches on a project he'd been working on for years. It was a cybernetic arm, advanced beyond anything that had existed during the war, designed not for military use but for civilian applications. The arm could perform microsurgery, create works of art, or help disabled miners work safely in dangerous conditions. Sam had built it using principles learned from studying his son's prosthetic, but he'd added something new, a small inscription on the wrist that read, "In memory of those who refused to quit." "It's beautiful, Sam," said his visitor, Dr. Kim from the Defense Department. "Marcus would be proud." Sam nodded, his eyes misty. He always said the hand wasn't special because it was metal. It was special because of what it helped him do. He gestured to the new prosthetic. "This one will help people build instead of destroy." "That seems more fitting somehow." Dr. Kim picked up the arm, marveling at its craftsmanship. "We'd like to mass-produce these, make them available to anyone who needs them. Would you be willing to oversee the project?" "Under one condition," Sam said. "Every arm comes with the same inscription. People should remember that having the right tools isn't enough. You have to be willing to use them for something bigger than yourself." "Agreed." As Dr. Kim left with the prototype, Sam returned to his workbench. On the wall above it hung a photo of Marcus in his pilot's uniform, grinning beside the Lucky Strike. The young man in the picture looked so confident, so alive. "The hand of fate," Sam whispered to the photo. "I always thought it was about luck. But you knew better, didn't you? It was about choice. The choice to keep fighting when everyone else would give up." In the years that followed, the Chen prosthetic became the standard for cybernetic limbs throughout human space. Every person who wore one carried a piece of Marcus's legacy, not just the technology, but the spirit behind it. Children who'd lost limbs in accidents found they could run and play again. Veterans injured in the continuing border conflicts discovered they could return to productive lives. Scientists and artists used the enhanced dexterity to push the boundaries of human achievement. But most importantly, everyone who wore a Chen prosthetic understood what it represented. It wasn't just about replacing what was lost, it was about becoming something more than you were before. The hand of fate had evolved from a single pilot's nickname into something larger, a reminder that humans could overcome any obstacle, adapt to any challenge, and find hope in the darkest circumstances. Admiral Hayes, now retired and teaching at the academy, often ended his lectures on military history with the same words: technology will advance. Tactics will evolve. But the one constant in human warfare is our refusal to accept defeat. That's what Marcus Chen understood, and that's what saved us all. On a distant world at the edge of human space, a mining colony faced its greatest crisis. The planet's unstable core was threatening to collapse, and evacuation seemed impossible with their limited ships. But the colony's chief engineer, a woman named Maria Santos who wore a Chen prosthetic on her left arm, stood before the panicked crowd with calm determination. "I know it looks hopeless," she said. "The numbers don't add up. We don't have enough ships, enough time, or enough resources. By every logical calculation, we should start writing our last messages home." The crowd stirred uneasily. These were practical people who understood mathematics and engineering. They could see the truth as clearly as Maria could. "But," Maria continued, raising her cybernetic hand, "I wear this arm because of a man who taught us that impossible is just another word for difficult." Marcus Chen didn't have the best ship or the best weapons when he faced the Crimson Dawn. But he had something else: the absolute refusal to let good people die on his watch. She pointed to the mining equipment around them. "We're going to strip every useful component from our machinery. We're going to jury-rig evacuation pods from or containers. We're going to turn mining charges into propulsion systems. And we're going to get every single person off this rock." "That's insane," someone called out. "Those pods will never make it to the pickup point." Maria smiled, and for a moment, she looked exactly like Marcus Chen standing beside the Lucky Strike. "Maybe. But we're going to try anyway. Because that's what humans do. We find a way." 3 days later, the improvised evacuation fleet limped into orbit around the rescue ships. Every single colonist had made it off the planet before the core collapse. The pods were barely holding together, held in place by spare parts and desperation, but they'd worked. As Maria climbed out of the lead pod, exhausted but triumphant, the rescue team commander shook his head in amazement. "How did you know that would work?" Maria looked down at her cybernetic hand, where the small inscription caught the light. "A friend taught me that the hand of fate isn't about having the right equipment. It's about having the right attitude." And so the legend grew. In every corner of human space, people facing impossible odds would remember Marcus Chen and the Lucky Strike. They'd think about the hand of fate, not as some mystical force, but as a reminder of what humans could accomplish when they refused to give up. The Zeltarians, now trading partners rather than enemies, established a saying in their own language: "Beware the humans when they smile at impossible odds." They'd learned, sometimes painfully, that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't any particular technology or tactic. It was hope. Stubborn, unreasonable, absolutely unshakable hope. The hand of fate lived on, not in any single person or device, but in the collective spirit of a species that simply would not quit. And in a galaxy full of wonders and dangers, that spirit continued to work miracles, one impossible victory at a time. Marcus Chen had saved the world with a suicide run against overwhelming odds. But his real victory was showing humanity that they could do the same thing, again and again, whenever the universe tried to tell them something couldn't be done. After all, impossible was just another word for difficult. And humans had always been very good at difficult. 10 years after Marcus Chen's sacrifice, humanity had grown comfortable. The Zeltarian War was history. Trade routes flourished. Colonies prospered. The galaxy seemed at peace. Then the Void Hunters arrived. They came from the dark space between galaxies, creatures of living shadow that consumed entire star systems. Unlike the Zeltarians, who at least used technology humans could understand, the Void Hunters operated on principles that defied physics itself. Their ships weren't built, they were grown. Their weapons didn't fire energy or projectiles, they erased things from existence. And they couldn't be reasoned with, bargained with, or defeated through conventional warfare. The first human colony to encounter them simply vanished. 17 million people, gone without a trace. No wreckage, no survivors, no explanation. Just empty space where New Geneva had been. Admiral Hayes, called out of retirement, stood in the emergency session of the Earth Defense Council. Around the table sat the most brilliant military minds in human space, and every single one of them looked terrified. "Conventional weapons have no effect," reported General Morrison. "Energy shields are useless. Even our Chen-class ships with their enhanced human-AI interfaces can't touch them." "What about the Zeltarians?" asked Councillor Park. "Surely their technology." "Already tried," Hayes interrupted. "The Hunters destroyed 3 Zeltarian battle fleets in as many days. They're just as helpless as we are." Silence filled the room. For the first time since the Lucky Strike's famous run, humanity faced an enemy that seemed truly unbeatable. "There has to be something," said Dr. Sarah Kim, now head of the Defense Research Division. "Marcus taught us that there's always a way." Marcus faced an enemy he could understand, Hayes replied grimly. "These things, they're not following any rules we know." On the research station orbiting Jupiter, Dr. Elena Vasquez stared at the data streams flowing across her screens. As the galaxy's leading expert on the Chen prosthetic interface technology, she'd been asked to find some way to adapt it for use against the Void Hunters. The problem was simple: you couldn't interface with something that existed outside normal reality. Elena rubbed her temple with her cybernetic hand. She'd lost her original in a lab accident years ago and had been one of the first to receive Sam Chen's new design. The inscription on her wrist caught her eye, in memory of those who refused to quit. "Refused to quit," she murmured. "But what if we're approaching this all wrong?" Her assistant, Tom Bradley, looked up from his own console. "What do you mean? We keep trying to fight them like they're ships. But what if they're not? What if they're something else entirely?" Elena pulled up the sensor readings from the attack on New Geneva. For weeks, analysts had been looking for weapons signatures, energy patterns, anything that might explain how the Hunters had made an entire world disappear. But Elena was looking at something different: the quantum fluctuations in the space around the vanished colony. "Tom, what if the Void Hunters aren't destroying things? What if they're moving them?" "Moving them where?" Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard, her cybernetic hand allowing her to input data faster than any purely human interface could manage. "What if there's another dimension? A pocket of space-time where everything they destroy actually goes?" Tom stared at the equations appearing on the screen. That's completely theoretical. Even if you're right, we have no way to access another dimension." Elena smiled, the same expression Marcus Chen had worn when he'd first seen the Crimson Dawn. "Maybe we do. The Chen prosthetics don't just interface with technology, they bridge the gap between human consciousness and quantum systems. What if we could push that bridge further?" 3 weeks later, Elena stood in a testing chamber wearing a prototype interface unlike anything ever built. Where the standard Chen prosthetic interfaced with one arm, this system connected to her entire nervous system through quantum-entangled circuits. "Elena, the power levels you're talking about could kill you," Tom warned from the control room. "So could the Void Hunters," she replied. "If this doesn't work, we're all dead anyway." The test began with Elena trying to extend her consciousness into nearby systems, first the room's computers, then the station's navigation array, then the quantum sensors monitoring local spacetime. At first, nothing happened. Then Elena felt something she'd never experienced before, her awareness expanding beyond the physical boundaries of her body. She could sense the fabric of reality itself, the underlying quantum foam that held the universe together. And there, like a shadow cast by a four-dimensional object, she felt them. The Void Hunters. They weren't ships at all. They were living tears in spacetime, creatures that existed partially in normal reality and partially in what humans called the null dimension, a place where matter and energy behaved according to different rules. "I can see them," Elena whispered, her voice echoing strangely as her consciousness straddled 2 realities. "They're not destroying things, they're stealing them. Pulling them into their dimension to feed on the life force. Can you stop them?" Tom asked urgently. Elena reached out with her enhanced awareness, trying to touch the boundary between dimensions. The moment she made contact, pain shot through her entire body. The Void Hunters had noticed her. But in that instant of contact, she understood. The Hunters weren't invincible, they were just operating from a place humans couldn't normally reach. But with the quantum interface, She could reach them. She could fight back. The battle for Earth survival took place in 2 dimensions simultaneously. In normal space, the Void Hunter fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system, dozens of impossible shapes that hurt to look at directly, moving in patterns that violated everything humans knew about physics. But in the null dimension, Elena Vasquez fought them with weapons made of pure will and quantum mathematics. Her consciousness, enhanced and expanded by the prototype interface, met the hunters on their own ground. It was nothing like the space battles humanity was used to. There were no ships, no weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, Elena used her understanding of quantum mechanics to literally rewrite the rules of reality in small, localized areas. When a hunter tried to open a dimensional tier to swallow Mars, Elena created a quantum feedback loop that snapped it shut. When they attempted to phase Earth itself into the null dimension, she anchored the planet's quantum signature to normal spacetime. But the effort was killing her. The human brain wasn't meant to exist in 2 dimensions at once, and Elena could feel her consciousness starting to fray at the edges. "Elena, your vitals are critical," Tom reported from the lab. "You need to disconnect." "Not yet," Elena gasped. "I'm starting to understand their language. They're not just predators, they're refugees. Something drove them out of their original dimension." As the battle raged across multiple layers of reality, Elena made a discovery that changed everything. The Void Hunters weren't evil, they were desperate. Their own dimension was collapsing, and they'd been forced to flee into normal space to survive. But they didn't understand that the things they were harvesting were alive, intelligent beings. To them, humans and Zeltarians were just complex patterns of energy, no different from stars or planets. "They don't know we're sentient," Elena realized. "They think they're just collecting resources." Using the quantum interface, Elena did something unprecedented. She established communication with the lead hunter. Not through words or symbols, but through direct transfer of consciousness and memory. She showed them Earth through human eyes. She shared Marcus Chen's memories of flying through space, of fighting to protect innocent people. She transmitted the full experience of human love, hope, fear, and determination. The effect was immediate. The hunters recoiled in shock, their dimensional attacks stopping mid-formation. For the first time in their existence, they understood that they had been committing genocide. The peace negotiations took place in a specially constructed facility that existed partially in both dimensions. Elena, now permanently changed by her experience in the null dimension, served as translator between the 2 species. The agreement they reached was unprecedented. The Void Hunters would stop their harvesting of sentient life, and in return, humanity would help them find uninhabited dimensions where they could establish new colonies. It wasn't easy. The Hunters' alien psychology made communication difficult, and many humans struggled to forgive beings who had destroyed entire worlds. But gradually, understanding grew. The Hunters shared their technology, not weapons, but tools for exploring the infinite layers of reality that existed beyond normal spacetime. Humans shared their knowledge of quantum mechanics and their unique ability to adapt and overcome impossible challenges. Elena became the first ambassador to the null dimension, using her enhanced consciousness to maintain the bridge between realities. It was a lonely existence. She could never fully return to normal spacetime, and the constant dimensional shifting meant she aged differently than other humans. But she had succeeded where conventional weapons had failed. Not through violence, but through understanding. Years later, children in human schools learned about the 3 miracles of the Hand of Fate. First was Marcus Chen's impossible victory over the Crimson Dawn. Second was Maria Santos's evacuation of the mining colony. Third was Elena Vasquez's dimensional breakthrough that saved not just humanity, but 2 entire species. The lesson was always the same: when faced with the impossible, humans found a way. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through determination, creativity, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. Elena's prototype interface became the foundation for humanity's expansion into multidimensional space. Explorers used quantum-enhanced consciousness to map parallel realities. Scientists discovered new laws of physics in alternate dimensions. Artists created works that existed in 4 or 5 dimensions simultaneously. The Chen prosthetic evolved again, becoming not just a replacement for lost limbs but a gateway to expanded human potential. Each new generation pushed the boundaries further, proving that Marcus Chen's simple truth remained constant: impossible was just another word for difficult. And humans would always be very good at difficult. In the Museum of Human Achievement on Earth, 3 displays stood side by side. The first contained a piece of the Lucky Strike and Marcus's burned cybernetic arm. The second held one of Maria's improvised evacuation pods. The third housed Elena's prototype quantum interface, still crackling with interdimensional energy. But the most important display was the fourth one, an empty space with a simple placard that read, "Reserved for the next impossible victory." Because everyone who visited the museum understood the real message: the hand of fate wasn't something that belonged to heroes of the past. It lived in every human who refused to accept defeat, who looked at impossible odds and smiled, who believed that there was always a way forward. The hand of fate was hope itself. And as long as humans existed, hope would find a way to work miracles.